Alright, so whatever, but I think that it's time so what I'm gonna do is well, I intend to review this book, but I just, based off how it went last time, I think it'll end up being sort of more of a discussion as well, and I have some notes, but not a lot. So I'll just kind of go through it and basically, hopefully, I'll be able to remember everything that I thought would be good to mention and talk about. But so the book is Son of God by Gregory Sams. The sun is smarter than we think. That's basically his claim. Discover the self-organizing consciousness that underlies everything. So, from the sounds of it, and he acknowledges it, that it sounds like he's making a pretty big claim there with that. And to begin, he does an alright job of covering that, from what I can remember at least. But there are some main points that kind of stood out. So you can see there's a foreword by Graham Hancock. If you're familiar with his work, he did something called Fingerprints of the Gods, which was a monumental book that came out sometime during the 90s and was about a potential lost civilization in Earth's history, which, if it turns out that they existed, would kind of change human beings' history quite a bit. But kind of makes it sound like that it would actually be Atlantis, like the fabled land of Atlantis itself. But more on that later, I guess. Near the back, at the end, the author mentions that he and Graham Hancock met through a guy named Sean, I guess. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so about the author himself, some of his work was promoted on Graham Hancock's page. He has another book out, I guess, before this, which is called The Uncommon Sense, The State is Out of Date, which argues against our current society's makeup, and that there's probably a better kind of system that we could ultimately implement that in some ways probably makes more sense, but this isn't about that really. It's about this work. So, as far as that goes, I guess from what I could gather about the author and his background and all that, and why he would choose to write something like this, and with that, how basically credible would some of his claims be. But I guess he's from England or the UK, and he was already pretty I guess popular for pioneering a vegetarian diet. And well, I guess there's a picture of him. Curious. Basically, I guess when he was growing up, he and his brother started a company basically selling natural foods and whatnot, I think, to grocery stores and whatnot. Basically, he ended up coming up with a formula for a veggie burger, and that ended up being popular. It's called Veggie Burger, but it's spelled, if you wanted to look it up, it's like VEGE burger. Looks kind of good, but so yeah, I guess it also turns out that his academic career was kind of cut short due to an accident that he had, which I guess is kind of unfortunate. I don't know. I think he might be kind of wheelchair bound now. To some extent, but I guess it says he fell out of a tree. So, however, to get on with this, you may have heard of this, I'm not sure, but as I was saying, this would seem like a fairly interesting book to read, and in some ways it is, but my main gripe with it is that I think in some ways it doesn't really get specific enough, and I guess he mentions a few reasons why he would suggest that the sun might be conscious, but he doesn't really go much into that. And again, if you're thinking to yourself, how could anyone take that notion seriously? In some ways, it could make some kind of sense if you have enough of the background info, I guess. And I'm not just talking about this, but what actually was part of the reason why I felt that this book was worth taking a look at was because, if you think about it, stars are kind of weird in a way, and that would be a thing that I would think about every so often. And so I kind of wanted to see what this guy had to say about that. Don't want to get too off topic. I kind of want to focus on the review here, but yeah. So I guess I said his claim is sort of that not just the sun, but he kind of goes into a bit more of that, but well, his claim is that the sun in some ways might be alive, and it's just that we're humans basically and animals, and so that we have sort of a bias when it comes to viewing certain things as conscious or not, or alive or not. Again, maybe some more on that later. But it turns out that this book's not really just about the sun. What it is, I mean, it ends up being decent for what it is, but I was sort of kind of hoping for more of a technical, in-depth sort of exposition on like what the sun is or what it could be, but that's just kind of like the background, and then he uses that notion to talk about some other ideas, like, you know, maybe like everything is conscious and not just the sun or whatever. But near the end, there's some like afterwards, and he kind of mentions that that was like his original idea for writing this, but somewhere along the line he just started, the work just sort of took its own shape, as things tend to do, I guess. And then, yeah. So it's not just about the sun. And in my opinion, I think, the title and whatnot kind of ends up being a bit misleading, and there's probably not enough stuff about the sun. And not just the sun, but stars in general, I would imagine. Kind of. So, from the sounds of it, you might be thinking that this guy and his ideas are kind of not hippie or new age, but something, along that. Well, because he's talking about consciousness, or a kind of consciousness, and he's associated with Graham Hancock. So, I guess by default, you might just associate him and his ideas with certain movements and certain communities, like, say, Burning Man, or, say you wouldn't be surprised if you saw him, like, at Burning Man or something, or, if he was, like, talking about and promoting ayahuasca or something. It's kind of like that. So, consciousness is and has been one of the kind of leading problems in human history and psychology and stuff like that for a while. And you could almost say that no one knows what consciousness is exactly, and stuff like that. So that's kind of where he's going with this. I guess he kind of figured, since no one really knows how to define consciousness, that there was room to present a kind of more radical idea such as this. And for what that's worth, this book is like a good, I would say, like, introduction to those kind of ideas, but in some ways it doesn't really get much further or into detail as that, as like a beginner introduction type thing. And for that reason, I found at least half of it kind of hard to enjoy or hard to slog through, because I feel, at least, like I have, just by being kind of familiar with, say, some of Graham Hancock's work and other, say Daniel Pinchbeck's type work, that it was just kind of was already familiar with a lot of the stuff that he was trying to say. And like I said earlier, he doesn't really go into a lot of detail about the sun and what it may be, which what the title of the book kind of suggests. So if you're like looking to get into that kind of stuff, then you might enjoy this book more than some other kinds of people, I guess. It's not just that. Like a few years ago, I spent like a couple years studying like astronomy. So there's a chapter in this book which is just about the sun, and he just kind of goes through it and mentions like all these facts about the sun, like the different layers and how hot it can end up being, and like how, a certain inner layer of the sun is cooler than a certain outer layer of the sun, which is kind of unusual as far as differentiation goes. So there's a few of those, but his point there is that even astronomers don't really know what's going on in the sun. I mean, they know some stuff, but like as far as why or whatever, it's hard to say, turns out. So I kind of already knew some of that, so it wasn't really, it was a good review, but it wasn't mind-blowing or anything. And again, that is another gripe that I've had with this, because like more than half of it is really just a bunch of facts, like whole sentences and paragraphs almost, or just like like facts that you might already know, but he's kind of mentioning them in order to support his ideas. But then it's like he just mentions a bunch of facts and then spends not a lot of time on his idea. So it doesn't make for a very deep experience in some respects. On the other hand, there is some stuff, like say I'm not an expert on religions and like different religions, And so he has a chapter on here on religions and the history of them and how they may differ and how they may be similar. So I found that interesting because I never really, I suppose it's relevant and it wouldn't hurt to, and I wouldn't mind, but it kind of depends on, I guess, to some extent, priorities. Like, I know some stuff about some religions, but he says a couple different points. He adds little notes saying that you can skip this chapter if you want and still kind of get the point of the book. But I just kind of went ahead and read it. So that was kind of interesting, but again, like, say if you were like an expert on the history of religions, then you might not find that chapter all that interesting or, important. But besides that, there are, like I said, some interesting points. Now, before I forget, we'll run out of time. The sun. So, like I said, what further interested me in deciding to read this book was the notion that it was going to be a thesis on how, I guess, not just the sun, but how stars would relate to consciousness. And like I said, I guess, I had been thinking a little bit about stars and what they are, and like, I guess how they work for us. So I was hoping that it would be more interesting than that. But what I mean by that is so as everyone probably knows, we need light in order to see or perceive in that way. And the sun is the ultimate source for that light. And, well, they're saying that without the sun we would die and everything would be dead, and that's because there would be no plants without the sun, and basically no food, or and the list could go on without the sun. But thing about the sun is that it provides electromagnetic radiation for us to see. And I guess in some ways we could get along fine without seeing, because there are other ways to go about life and perceive, but it's not just that, it's just what that is. You know, like the light comes down and, as they say, it bounces off stuff. I mean, I guess it's getting the photons are getting absorbed by the electrons and these various objects, and then being emitted. Basically, the light's coming down and bouncing off these objects and then going into our eyes, and we see an image of that. For what it is. And I mean, it didn't take that long for people to invent torches and light bulbs and other stuff like that, but after all this time, I guess it's easy enough to be fortunate for the sun and be lucky. And as everyone knows, visible radiation isn't the only form of radiation, and it's only called visible because it makes stuff visible to us as humans. But I mean, this is like one of my favorite images that I'm glad is in here. But we're all familiar with the band of electromagnetic radiation in which visible light only takes up a tiny section of that. If you want just like a quick picture, I don't know if you can see, but the EM spectrum, it depends on the wavelength or the frequency of the light waves, and that depends on what kind of radiation you get in that. So, say visible light, you know, has waves like this, of this width, but if you have a longer wave, it's like a radio wave, or then a microwave, which, you know, we use radio waves for radio, can't really see them. I mean, I guess our nervous system isn't really designed to process them with the eyes. But once you get to a specific wavelength on the spectrum, then you start to see stuff. I mean, you can kind of see it, but and you know, like what's after visible is ultraviolet, which you can't see. I guess there are some people that have this thing where they can see ultraviolet. I think there might be like a surgery also. If you don't have that, then you can do a voluntary surgery so that you can see ultraviolet radiation. But then you know, there's X-rays after that. But like, for example, these wavelengths are also another way of saying like the temperature and how hot something is, which I think is basically how much energy is carried in that wave. For example, is like one of my favorite examples, but say, well, say you just have like a source of heat that you could adjust the temperature on, and say you like turn it on and it starts off in like radio or microwaves, but you make it hotter and you wouldn't really be able to see it, but if it gets to a certain temperature, you'll kind of start to see it, and that'll be like infrared, which is not exactly red, but it's before like red, like on the rainbow, you know. If you remember that guy, what was his name? Roy G. Biv. It's like the colors of the rainbow, so it's like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So that's why red is before blue, because it's not as hot as blue. And I mean, you take that same example and you have different kinds of stars. Like you have blue stars, which end up being able to reach temperatures way beyond that of, say, yellow or white stars or the red stars. So the color of those stars are kind of based off that in a way. But like, you know, if you were there's a few different examples, but it's like if you just lit something on fire, I mean, as everyday objects are emitting radiation, that you pick up radiation from tons of different sources, you know, and even like foods give you radiation in a way. Some, like, I think bananas are one of the most food sources that contain, like, one of the highest amounts of radiation that you can get. But it's kind of like Fallout, like, where you get rads. But it's just, kind of getting to the point, but say, like, anything, like this thing, like it's like if you had like a cigarette, and in and of itself it's emitting infrared radiation because that's just the temperature of it. But you could easily light it on fire, or strike it with a match, and it'll be lit, and you'll see a glow, like that orange glow. It's like visible light there, almost. But once it starts to go out, you won't be able to see that glow or see the fact that it's emitting heat. But if you light something on fire and it goes out, you could still see, like, smoke coming from it, and it'll still be kind of warm. It's probably like infrared light coming from it. It's not hot enough anymore to be visible to the human eye. Similarly, you might, you see, like, blue flames, and it's like approaching. Well, it'll be bluer, and it'll be approaching ultraviolet. But not every material has a structure stable enough to withstand those temperatures, so it'll probably be destroyed before it'll reflect blue light, basically. But the point of all that is that we see the visible band of the spectrum significant, and just leave it at that and be like, oh yeah, life, the universe, it's good. But it's kind of more to it than that. So that stuff just kind of ties into like the search for life on other planets or in other solar systems and whatnot. But fact of the matter is, and the sun doesn't just emit visible light, some other stuff too, but it just seems kind of coincidental that all these conditions are, or you could say that we have adapted fairly well to the conditions presented to us, as if we had like a choice or not. But our planet is like the perfect amount of distance away from the sun. It's not too close, it's not too far, or anything like that. And at that point, someone will say like, God put the planet there or something. Or God did this, God did that. But conventional physics has a more human, less centric explanation for that, I guess. And from there is where some of these more new age ideas come from, and see like pro-feminism or anything like that in the USA at least, and I'm sure in other places, things are heavily based off of the Bible and religion, which, as we all know, religions are known for doing weird things, like killing Jesus, or, burning witches and doing stuff like that, because they faced opposition. Now, there's the example of, say, Galileo, who originally people, the church, and they enforced it, thought or said that the earth is the center of the universe and that everything goes around it. But then someone, Kepler kind of did some stuff on that as well, but Galileo is a popular example who said and was punished via house arrest on it for claiming otherwise, that the sun was in the center and its planets went around that. And there's some backstory to that as well, but there's another guy, Giordano Bruno, who also, and he fought vehemently to try and get the church to claim otherwise, that the earth wasn't in the center, but they killed him. So Galileo was lucky to only get house arrest, etc. But to have the arguments go, to have a society and rules and laws based off of that kind of, those kind of belief systems, and to have, these lands and this freedom to be based off of that kind of stuff is maybe a bit odd. And it's also claimed that, like even today, some of the United States military is kind of doing the same stuff that, say, the Christians were doing back then. Conquering lands and whatnot. So stuff is still kind of based off of that kind of stuff when it's not really the best ideological system that we could have. It's one of the arguments. And a lot of that kind of stems from like some worship of the sun. You know, they would go ahead and say that the sun was the initial idol of worship, which in some ways makes sense. There are some other theories out there that claim otherwise. But well, it depends on which theory there has more basis, or maybe even different cultures probably handle that accordingly, differently, but yeah. So there are different gods, or different things that people claim to be God. Kind of off topic, but so what that's related to actually is kind of everyone's favorite idea. Well, seeing as how this guy, Gregory Sams, the author, wishes to explain his notion he proposes that the sun is a conscious being, and like I said, he gives some pretty good reasons for that, but what he doesn't do, and what makes the book wanting, is there aren't really any mechanisms for how that may be. There's some, I guess, but the type of consciousness he's talking about, I kind of meant to say it earlier, but that's kind of acknowledged, and he goes with a dictionary definition for it by saying that for the book, that the definition of consciousness that he's gonna roll with is with knowing. So yeah, so to be considered conscious, there has to be some kind of awareness of what being is. And so that'll be kind of different from, say, I guess, animal instincts to some extent. So with that, I think to some extent he kind of becomes a proponent of that classic kind of Aldous Huxley consciousness thing, you know, like the whole kind of Aldous Huxley universal field of consciousness, which might be also Jung based. And that's all, you know, that's fine. But it's hard to say. So exactly what's going on there, like what should come with that is a few things. And that's basically what it is. It's more of a thing that they say modern science can't really explain, and that's why the ideas aren't really taken that serious. So he kind of uses some science to get at that. For example, if you do look up anything on the sun, say look up the Sun's Wikipedia page, or take a book, or like a textbook, or a conventional, say, astronomy textbook, and look up the sun, it'll just be like facts and data and whatnot. But of course, it wouldn't really say anything about the sun being conscious, or there wouldn't really be any philosophical stuff about the sun. It'll just be like hard data and whatnot. And that's what some of that is. It's just the astronomers interpreting the data there for that claim. You still get a lot of interesting stuff out of that, you know, otherwise, but that is some of the not new age, but some of the like kind of, you know, kind of the new age gripes with some of that stuff. For example, but yeah, so for example, yeah, he goes on to suggest some stuff like, you know, everything is conscious, or everything has consciousness, of course in like different forms that most people would not recognize. Because it's not animated, I guess. But he's saying perhaps to some extent inanimate matter has consciousness. And these are these ideas, you know. So it's good that there's a book about it, sort of specifically, but I would have hoped that it would have been more in-depth and technical to some extent. So he's just saying that everything is kind of made out of the same stuff. And it is, or it could be, somewhat remarkable that humans and animals are animated and they have stuff, like consciousness, or if you want to take it to that level, some would argue that certain animals are not conscious, but that they're just kind of instincts related, which, taking it one step further, you can kind of get into some interesting philosophical ideas. More on that later, though. Hopefully stay on topic for a bit. And so I think that that's kind of like a thing that I think kids might think about sometimes when they're growing up. I don't know, it could kind of resonate with some people. Well, for example, and that's what he's saying here, but say when I was growing up, you would have certain feelings for things in a way sometimes, say there's a leaf, say there's 2 leaves on the ground or something, and you pick one up, and then you leave the other leaf there, and you're like, oh, I have this leaf, but then you're like, oh, what about the other one? Does the other one feel bad in some way because this person took that one, not the other one, or, Not to say you hurt its feelings in some way or something, but it can be a hard choice. Some ways, as you get older, I guess you're kind of forced to do other stuff, but yeah. So some ways that's the gist of it there. It kind of just boils down to not being too cruel, which he gets into a bit later as well. For example, well, yeah. there's a few things. I mean, ultimately, you would have to read the book if you want like a full thing about it, but his idea there is that all these things come from like the same thing, and based off of that, there can be some kind of life force within it all, or it would be as if the universe is conscious itself in a way, which that idea would get a lot of slack from some people. Because it's not exactly like that. Not really the same thing. And then his idea would be that light in some ways the mediator of all that, which is a decent proposal, but you have to look a lot more into that. You have to do a lot more with that. So at some point, considering all that, well, he conventional models of the solar system and solar systems in general, or planet formation, just kind of hold it that it all formed via basic physics, and the models held well up until a certain point where astronomers found other stars with other planets that didn't quite fit our current model. So they didn't exactly throw it away, but they just figured it wasn't really like the only model that could occur. But you know, it was basically like gravity happens, and after, you know, millions and billions of years of gravity taking its course, then you would get something like a cloud, and after even more millions of years and friction and gravity, you would get like a star, basically. You know, all that material would accrete, and it's all just atoms. So like conventional models have it that, well, you have hydrogen, which is the most basic element, and that's what's going on in the sun, is that it's so hot that these things are moving at intense speeds. And in order for you to get anything more complicated than a hydrogen, you need something like that to occur. Of course, so in the sun, you have hydrogen, which is moving really fast and colliding with other hydrogens, and basically those hydrogens are making heliums, which is another element, periodic table. And eventually those heliums also fuse and make other stuff. That's going on in all these stars, and when those atoms fuse, they give off radiation, and some of that is the light that we get coming down from the sun on the Earth. So, and that's just E equals mc squared. You know, that's one instance where Einstein's E equals mc squared equation is used, of course. You can do it some other time. The calculator. Anyway, so stuff like that is being used for the notion that there could be some connection between everything and all, substances, especially here on Earth. Since it all presumably came from the same cloud. I don't want to get too much into that because it's kind of off topic. But right. I'm just waiting for that, by the way. Anyway, so irrespective of all that and how all that may happen, you might get stuff like that. For example, well, his thing there with all that is that it all just kind of boils down to being more appreciative of life, considering that. And if you remember, Mr. Sams was an entrepreneur in the veggie food business and that kind of things. I presume are related to that notion. And he takes it further with his idea of that kind of consciousness. And again, some of these ideas still get a lot of slack in a way, but I guess this came out in 2009, but you know, he then goes on